Chapter 4. As Ambler gulped air, his entire body quaking with muscular fatigue, a flicker of the big man's eye told Ambler what he needed to know. The man was going for the coup de grace, a single roundhouse punch to the jaw, with all the immense upper body strength he possessed. Except that Ambler did the one thing he was capable of doing, the one thing no professional would think of doing. He dropped to the ground with exquisite timing, and the bare-knuckled punch connected with the trunk. As the man howled in pain, Ambler sprang upward, butting his head into his opponent's solar plexus, and then, before he even heard the reflexive expulsion of breath, he grasped the man's ankles and heaved. At long last, the gunman spilled out of the stand, and Ambler plunged down after him. On top of him, Ambler at least had something soft to break his fall. With fast, deft movements, Ambler yanked off the man's Kevlar-lined camouflage jacket and combat vest. Then he detached the long-barreled rifle from its sling and used the sling to tie the gunman's hands behind his back. The center two knuckles of his right hand were red, bloodied, and beginning to swell, obviously broken. The man moaned in agony. Ambler looked around for the Beretta. It glinted from beneath the thorny coils of the multiflora rose, and Ambler decided to put off retrieving it. "Kneel, G.I. Joe," Ambler said. "You know the position. Cross your ankles." The man did so, moving with reluctance, but without uncertainty, like someone who had forced others into the same position. He had obviously had standard U.S. combat training. Undoubtedly, he had had a great deal more. "I think something's broken, man," the man said in a low, strangled voice, clutching his ribs. "Deep South, Mississippi," Ambler would have guessed. "You'll live," Ambler said shortly, "or not. That's really for us to decide, isn't it?" "I don't think you understand the situation," the man said. "Which is exactly where you come in," Ambler replied. He started patting the man's trouser pockets and extracted a military-style pocket knife. "Now, we're going to play a little game of truth or dare." He swung out the pocket knife's scaler and held it very close to the man's face. "See, I don't have a lot of time, so I'm going to have to go straight to the meat of the matter." Ambler worked to control his breathing. He needed to seem calm and in command, and he needed to focus on the kneeling man's face, even as he menaced it with the fish scaler. "First question, are you working alone?" "No way, a bunch of us here." He was lying, even dulled by the carfentanil. Ambler knew it, the way he always knew it. When colleagues would ask how, he found himself giving different answers in different cases. A tremble in the voice in one case, a tone of voice that was too assertively smooth and insouciant in another, something around the mouth, something around the eyes. There was always something. Side note, like Chapter 7 and intensity. End of side note. Anyway. Consular operations had once assigned people to study his peculiar faculty. To the best of his knowledge, nobody had ever managed to duplicate it. Intuition was what he called it. Intuition meant he didn't know. Sometimes he even wondered whether his gift wasn't so much capacity as an incapacity. He wasn't able not to see. Most people filtered what they saw when they looked at someone's face. They operated by the rule of inference to the best explanation, meaning that whatever didn't sync with the explanation that made the most sense to them, they ignored. Ambler lacked that ability to tune out what did not sync. "So, you're alone," Ambler told the kneeling operative, "as I would have expected." Yeah, right. The man protested, but without conviction. Even without knowing who they were or what they wanted, Ambler realized that they must have figured it was a long shot that he'd show up here. There were 50 other places he might have gone to, and he guessed there were people positioned at those other places too. Given the odds and the short notice, strategy would dictate a single watcher at each. It was a question of manpower. "Next question, what's my name?" "I wasn't informed," the man said in an almost resentful tone. The claim seemed incredible, but the man was telling him the truth. I don't see a subject photograph in your pockets. How are you going to identify me? No photo. Assignment arrived a few hours ago. They said you were 40 years old, 6 foot tall, brown hair, blue eyes. To me, you're just January man. Basically, if anybody showed up in this godforsaken place today, it was going to be you. That's how they explained it. It wasn't like I was being sent to an NRA convention, okay? Well done, Ambler said. The account given was strange. It was not deceptive. You told me the truth. You see, I can always tell. Whatever you say, the man said. He was not a believer. Ambler needed to make him a believer. The interrogation would go more smoothly that way. Try me. I'll ask you a few harmless questions. You answer truthfully or not, as you prefer. See if I can tell. For starters, did you have a dog when you were a kid? Nope. See, now you're lying. What was the dog's name? Elmer. An honest answer. What was your mother's first name? Marie. Wrong. How about your father's? Jim. Wrong. Ambler said, and he saw that the kneeling man was visibly spooked by the ease with which his responses were assessed. How did Elmer die? Run over by a car. Right, Ambler said encouragingly, a truthful answer. Now hold that idea tight, because from now on only truthful answers will do. Next section of the exam, who are you working for? My damn ribs are broken. That's non-responsive. I warned you that I have no time to waste. They'll explain, it's not for me to say. Confidence was starting to return to the man's voice. Ambler would have to undermine that confidence or lose his chance to learn what he needed to know. Explain? You don't seem to understand. They're not in charge of you right now. I am. He pressed the serrated edge of the fish scaler to the gunman's right cheek. Please, the southerner moaned. Small pinpricks of blood were visible at the projecting edges of the jagged implement. A word of advice, if you're going to take a gun to a knife fight, make sure you win. Ambler's voice was arctic and assured. That was part of the craft of interrogation, the aura of utter determination and ruthlessness. He focused on the long-barreled rifle, a Pax Arms MK-24B, a .509 caliber syringe projection rifle. A pretty fancy piece of equipment, Ambler said, not part of G.I. Joe's usual kit bag. What's the deal? He pressed down again with the fish scaler. Please, the man said, and it was as if all the air had come out of him. You were tasked to an abduction detail. Instructions were to knock me out, and then what? Those weren't exactly the instructions. The man sounded almost sheepish. Seems the people I work for have taken a real interest in you. The people you work for? Ambler repeated. The government, you mean? Huh? A puzzled look as if he thought Ambler might be teasing him, but wasn't sure. We're talking about a strictly private outfit, okay? I don't work for a government pay grade, that's for damn sure. They said you might show up, and if so, I was to make an approach. Ambler had pointed to the Pax Arms rifle. That's what you mean by an approach? They said to use my discretion if I thought you might be dangerous. He shrugged, so I took the trank gun just in case. And? He shrugged again. I thought you might be dangerous. Ambler's gaze was unblinking. Was there a drop-off point in the scenario? I wasn't told ahead of time. They were going to radio that info to me once I reported in that you were either on board or in custody, assuming you showed. I don't know how likely they thought that was. They? I have to tell you that's not my favorite word. Look, these people hire me to do jobs, but they do it at a remove. It's not like we play mahjong on Sundays, alright? The sense I got was they just learned you were on the market and they want to sign you up before someone else does. Nice to be in demand. Ambler struggled to process what he was hearing. Meanwhile, it was important that he not let the rhythm of questioning falter. Method of contact. We've got a kind of long-distance relationship. This morning I got an encrypted email with the instruction. Partial payment was wired into an account. The deal was on. The words came out in a rush. No meetings. Total breakaway security. The man was telling him the truth, and his words told Ambler even more than their explicit content. Breakaway security, jargon from U.S. intelligence. You're an American operative, Ambler said. Retired, like I said, used to be MI. Military intelligence then. Special forces for 7 years. So now you're freelance. You got it. Ambler unzipped a pouch attached to the man's camouflage vest. There was a slightly battered-looking Nokia cell phone, probably for personal use, and Ambler pocketed it. He also found, as he expected, a military version of a BlackBerry text messaging device, end-to-end RASP, all in caps, data security. Both the gunman and the outfit that had recruited him were accustomed to using U.S. clandestine service equipment. So, here's the barter, Ambler said. You tell me the email protocol and your passcodes. There was a pause, then with a new look of resolve, the man slowly shook his head. Dream on. Ambler felt a twinge. Once again, he had to regain the dominant position. He knew, studying the emotions on the man's countenance, that he wasn't dealing with a fanatic, a true believer. The man before him really was play for pay. His objective was to maintain his reputation for reliability. Future jobs depended on it. What Ambler needed to impress upon him was that his having a future at all depended upon his cooperation. At times like this, an air of calm reasonableness wasn't effective. Rather, the air to be projected was that of a resolute sadist, happy to be provided with any opportunity to apply his craft. Do you know what a man's face looks like when it's flayed? Ambler said evenly. I do. The dermal matrix is surprisingly tough, but it adheres only loosely to the layers of lipid and muscle underneath it. Once you cut a flap, in other words, the skin separates quite easily from the fascia beneath. It's like stripping sod from a lawn. And once you lift up the skin, you can see the incredibly intricate striation of the facial muscles. The fish scaler isn't the ideal tool for it. It's very messy, makes very ragged cuts. Still, it gets the job done. You won't be in a position to look, I'm afraid, but I'll describe what I see. That way you won't miss anything. Now then, shall we begin? You might feel a little pinch, well, more than a pinch. It'll feel more like someone's tearing your face off. The kneeling man's eyes constricted in fear. You said a barter? The man said. What do I get? Oh, that. You get to, how shall I put it, save face. The man swallowed hard. Passcode is 1345GD. He said hoarsely. Repeat 1345GD. A friendly reminder, if you lie, I'll know immediately. Ambler said, get a single detail wrong and we'll return to our anatomy lesson. You need to understand this. I'm not lying. A wintry smile. I know. Email encryption is automatic with the hardware. Subject line must say, seeking Ulysses. Capitalizing doesn't matter. Sign-off is Cyclop. The man continued to detail the communication protocols that had been established, and Ambler committed them to memory. You gotta let me go, man, the Southerner said after Ambler had made him repeat everything 3 times. Ambler took off his tan jacket and put on the man's combat vest and camouflage jacket. They seemed like articles that were likely to come in handy. He fished out the man's belt wallet and strapped it on himself. Most off the books operatives carried substantial sums of cash on them, and that too might come in handy. The Beretta remained lost somewhere in the thorny underbrush. As for the rifle, its bulk would make it more of an impediment to Ambler than an advantage, at least in the short term, and right now the short term stretched before him like a dozen lifetimes. He field-stripped it and tossed the 6 remaining tranquilizer darts into the thickets. Only then did he untie the man's hands and toss him his tan jacket. Say don't freeze, he said. Ambler felt a slight stinging sensation at the side of his neck. A gnat, a mosquito, and absently slapped at it with the hand. It was a few moments before he realized that there would be no such insects around at this time of year, and by then he had noticed that his fingertips were wet with his own blood. Not an insect, not a dart, a bullet. He whirled around. The man he had just untied crumpled to the ground, bright red blood spilling from his mouth, the fixed stare of death on his face. A sniper's bullet, the same bullet that grazed Ambler's neck, must have entered his mouth and penetrated the back of his head. Ambler had decided to spare the man's life, someone else had not. Or was the bullet meant for Ambler? He had to run. Ambler plunged through the woods at top speed. His gift of the tan coat might well have been a death sentence, flagging the man for execution. A distant sniper would have keyed to the color, but why send someone to, quote-unquote, make an approach if the plan was to kill him? Ambler had to leave the Sourlands. The Honda had no doubt already been located. What other vehicles were in the area? He remembered seeing a tarp-covered gator a quarter of a mile up the hill. It was a low-green off-road utility vehicle, capable of traversing almost any terrain, swamps, streams, hills. When he reached it, he wasn't surprised to find that the keys were in it. This was still a part of the world where nobody locked his front door. The gator started up easily, and Ambler drove through the woods as fast as it would go, holding on to the steering wheel when the vehicle bounced over rocks, ducking his head down when low branches threatened. It lurched easily over brambles and thickets. As long as he had room to maneuver between trees, the underbrush would not stop him, nor would the rocky gulches and streams. The ride was bumpy and lurching, like mounting a horse that hadn't quite been broken, but its grip of the terrain was never less than secure. The windshield of the gator suddenly exploded, turned opaque with spiderwebbing. A second bullet had finally arrived. He steered crazily, randomly, hoping that the bouncing of the vehicle on rough terrain would make him harder to keep in the crosshairs of the sniper's scope. Meanwhile, his mind reeled in a wilderness of uncertainties. The line of fire told him that the shot had to have been fired from somewhere across the lake, somewhere in the area of Magruder's old house, or the pylon farther up the hill, or he scanned the horizon in his mind, the grain silo at the Steptoe farm, a little up the hill. Yes, that's where he would set up if he was running an op. Safety lay up the slopes where the incline gave way to an indented area. A paved road ran along it, and if he could reach it, he'd be protected from the sniper by the earth itself. Gunning the engine, he found the vehicle was able to move up the steepest slopes of the Sourland Mountains with ease. 10 minutes later, he reached the road. The gator was too slow to keep up with regular automotive traffic, and the gunshot-shattered windshield would attract the wrong kind of notice. So he drove the gator behind a dense stand of eastern red cedars and turned off the engine. There was no sound of any pursuer, no sound of anything but the ticking of the gator's stilled engine and the rushing of cars on the nearby mountain road. He took out the slain man's PDA. They want to sign you up. The man had believed it, but was it a ruse? Clearly, whatever outfit had recruited the American ex-operative intended to keep itself out of remove breakaway security. Yet Ambler had to learn what they knew. Now it was up to him to make an approach, but on his terms and as someone other than who he was. To overcome the mechanisms of caution, the message needed to promise something, threaten something. The imagination was a powerful thing. The less specific the message, the better. After a few moments' thought, he thumb-typed a message, one that was terse but carefully crafted. An encounter with the subject, he explained, had not gone as planned, but he now found himself in possession of some interesting documents. A meeting would be necessary. He kept the explanation minimal, without elaboration of any sort. Awaiting instructions, he typed. Then he sent the message off to whoever was at the other end of the crypto system. Now he made his way to the side of the road. In the camouflage jacket, he would look like an out-of-season hunter. Few people from the area were likely to disapprove. A couple of minutes later, a middle-aged woman driving a GMC with an overflowing cigarette tray picked him up. She had a lot on her mind and talked nonstop before dropping him off at the Motel 6 near Route 173. Ambler was certain he had made polite noises as she spoke, but he barely heard a word. $75 for a room. For a brief moment, he worried that he wouldn't have enough, but then he remembered the belt wallet. Checking in under a randomly confected name, he struggled to keep at bay the utter exhaustion that threatened to engulf him at any moment, and probably would have even without whatever carfentanil remained in his system. He needed a room. He needed a rest. The room was as utterly nondescript as he could have hoped, the style of no style. Hurriedly, he went through the contents of the slain man's belt wallet. There were 2 sets of identification cards. Most useful would be the driver's license from Georgia, Where the computer systems were particularly unevolved, the license looked unremarkable, but as Ambler flexed it, he could tell that it was actually designed to make alteration easy. Ambler would have no difficulty getting a postage-sized photograph of himself at a shopping mall and adapting a license that had been spurious to begin with. The operative's height and eye color were different from his, but not dramatically enough to arouse notice. Tomorrow, but there were so many things he would have to deal with tomorrow. So many things he was too exhausted to contemplate right now. Indeed, he felt on the verge of blacking out. The combination of physical and emotional stress was nearly overwhelming. Instead, he force-marched himself into the shower, made the water as hot as he could tolerate, and remained there for a long time, sudsing the sweat, blood, and grime off his body until nothing remained of the small, motel-issue bar of soap. Only then did he stagger out of the shower and begin to dry himself with the white cotton towels. There was so much he needed to ponder, and yet he somehow felt that he could not allow himself to do so. Not now. Not today. He towel-dried his hair vigorously and stepped over to the mirror above the sink. It was fogged with steam, and he heated it with the hairdryer until an oval was cleared. He could not remember the last time he had seen his own face. How many months had it been? And he braced himself for a haggard countenance. When he finally saw himself in the mirror, vertigo overcame him completely. It was the face of a stranger. Ambler could feel his knees buckling beneath him, and the next thing he knew, he was on the floor. The man in the mirror was unrecognizable to him. It wasn't a gaunter or harrowed version of him. It wasn't him with an age-etched brow or dark hollows beneath his eyes. It wasn't him at all. The high angular cheekbones, the aquiline nose, it was a perfectly handsome face. A face most would consider more handsome than his own, save for a certain cruelty to the visage. His own nose had been more rounded, broad, and slightly fleshy at the tip. His cheeks had been more convex, the chin cleft. "He is not me," Ambler thought. And the illogic battered him like a powerful wave. It was the man he saw in the mirror. It was a face that he could not recognize, but that he could read, and what he read in it was the same emotion that filled his own breast. Terror. No, something beyond terror. Dread. The cataract of psychiatric jargon to which he had been subjected during his months of captivity, dissociative identity disorder, personality fragmentation, and on, suddenly filled his mind. He could hear, as if in a chorus of murmured voices, the doctor's insistence that he had suffered a psychotic break and was drifting through fictive identities. Could they have been right? Was he mad after all?